Meet Robert.
Wealth is a journey.
Robert is 52,
not just
a project manager
destination.
pulling in $94,000 a year.
Ignore the noise.
Last
and
Tuesday
watch
morning,
it
right
grow.
around 9, Robert opened his brokerage app and saw a figure he'd been chasing for 3 decades, $1,200 short of nothing, because he'd finally crossed it. A 7-figure net worth. And then Robert did the exact thing that quietly wrecks most brand new millionaires. He felt like he'd arrived. He felt like the grind was officially behind him. He let his guard down. Here's the part nobody warns you about that number. The instant your net worth crosses $1 million is not the finish line. It's actually the single riskiest moment in your entire financial life, because $1 million is precisely the point where your money can either start working harder than you ever could or quietly bleed away while you're not looking. Most people throw a party the day they hit it. The ones who actually stay wealthy get noticeably more cautious. Right now, somewhere around 24 million Americans sit above that $1 million mark. That's roughly 1 out of every 11 adults. More than 1,000 people cross that threshold every single day in this country alone. So this isn't some exclusive, untouchable club. You might be a lot closer to it than you assume. But here's the part that should give you pause. A massive chunk of these fresh millionaires are what I'd call paper millionaires. Their wealth is locked up in home equity, not sitting anywhere they can actually spend it. Median home prices in the US jumped 45% in just 5 years. Millions of everyday people became millionaires on paper without altering a single habit. And that's precisely why so many of them end up losing it. They hit the number, feel wealthy, and start spending as if the number were a paycheck. It isn't one. That million is an engine, not a trophy. What you do in the 90 days right after crossing that line determines whether it multiplies into 5 million or slowly drains back toward nothing. This isn't about luck. It comes down to a handful of decisions almost nobody actually plans for. Let me walk you through what the numbers actually reveal. Let me introduce 2 people who both crossed the $1 million mark in the same year. Robert, who you just met, and Priya, his coworker. Priya is 32. A marketing lead earning $88,000 a year. Both of them hit 7 figures within months of one another. Same company, same salary bracket, same exact milestone. But watch what unfolds from here, because the gap between the 2 of them is about to become massive. When Priya hit her million, she reacted the way almost everyone instinctively does. She celebrated. She swapped her paid-off Camry for a $58,000 SUV. She upgraded her apartment, tacking on an extra $900 a month in rent. She shared the news with a handful of friends. She started saying yes to every dinner invite, every getaway, every little upgrade. In her mind, she'd made it. The struggle was finally over. And every one of those choices felt earned, because in a real sense, it was. Priya worked hard for that million. Nobody handed it to her. Robert crossed the same threshold and did something that looked almost dull by comparison. He changed absolutely nothing about his day-to-day life for 90 days straight. Same car, same apartment, same grocery run, same routine. Instead, he sat down at his kitchen table and worked through the math. He asked himself a single question that Priya never paused to consider. What is this $1 million actually for? That one question is the entire dividing line between $1 million that grows and $1 million that quietly disappears. Let's be fair here. Priya isn't reckless and she isn't foolish. She did precisely what most people do the moment they feel rich. And what most people do ends up quietly wiping out their first million without them ever noticing it happening. Let's run the numbers together and you'll see exactly why. Here's the first thing nobody tells you about $1 million. Using a safe 4% withdrawal rate, $1 million generates roughly $40,000 a year. That's the whole picture, $40,000, and that's before taxes take their cut. Now stack that against reality. The average American household spends close to $78,000 annually. So the figure that felt like limitless freedom actually covers barely more than half of an ordinary life. This is the trap hiding inside that big round number. $1 million sounds like the end of every money problem you've ever had. On paper, though, it spends like a fairly average salary. Robert understood this the second he crossed the line. Priya didn't. She saw $1 million and her brain translated it as rich forever. Her brain was wrong, and her brand new SUV was the first piece of evidence. Here's what genuinely happens to $1 million when it's left completely undisturbed. And this is the exact opportunity Priya never gave her money a chance to have. Getting from $100,000 to $1 million requires multiplying your money by 10. That's brutal. Years of saving, sacrificing, grinding, staying patient. But getting from 1 million to 2 million only requires doubling it. A factor of 2, not 10. That's not the same mountain you already climbed. It's a hill by comparison. Financial data shows the second million tends to arrive roughly 2.5 times faster than the first one did. Why? Because once you hit $1 million, you're no longer climbing solo. You've effectively hired a second worker, and that worker never sleeps, never quits, and never asks for a raise. Its name is compound interest. Run the math. $1 million growing at 7% annually, left completely untouched, becomes nearly $2 million within just 10 years. You didn't have to save one additional dollar to make that happen. The money did all the heavy lifting on its own. That's the exact engine Priya sold off to make payments on an SUV. Here's what most people get dead wrong about the real danger at this level. They assume the biggest threat to $1 million is a stock market crash. It isn't. The real threat is you. The most dangerous force lurking at the $1 million mark is a quiet, patient thief known as lifestyle creep. Lifestyle creep happens when your spending gradually rises to match your new sense of status. It never feels like a mistake in the moment. It always feels like a reward you've finally earned. Priya added $900 a month for the nicer apartment. That's $10,800 a year. Now take that same amount and invest it instead at 7% over 20 years, and it grows into more than $440,000. Read that again slowly. Priya didn't just spend $900 a month. She spent $440,000 of her own future wealth, one comfortable evening at a time. That's the real price tag on the upgrade, and nobody ever sits her down to show her that number. Here's what nobody tells you about the new car specifically. Priya traded a fully paid-off Camry for a $58,000 SUV. The moment it left the dealership lot, it started losing value. A brand new vehicle typically loses about 20% of its value within the first year alone. That's over $11,000 gone while she was still making payments on it. Robert kept the old Camry. It still runs fine. The gap between the two of them was never about taste. It was about direction. Priya pulled money out of the engine and poured it into a depreciating hunk of metal. Robert left every dollar inside the engine, where it kept compounding. Most people assume a millionaire is supposed to drive like one. But the actual millionaires I've studied tend to drive like the number still matters to them, because to them, it genuinely does. Here's the tax trap almost nobody plans for ahead of time. When Priya needed cash for her new lifestyle, she started selling off investments, and every single sale triggered a tax bill she never budgeted for. Long-term capital gains can be taxed as high as 20% at the federal level, and your state can take an additional bite on top of that. So to actually pocket $50,000, she sometimes had to sell off $60,000 or more. Robert did the opposite. He learned exactly where each of his dollars lived, which sat in a taxable brokerage account, which were tucked in his 401k, and which sat inside his Roth. That skill is called asset location, and done correctly, it can save you tens of thousands of dollars over a decade. Most people never bother learning it. They just sell whatever's easiest and quietly hand the difference to the government every April. Here's a mistake that hides inside good intentions. After crossing $1 million, Priya decided she wanted to protect it, so she moved a large chunk into cash. It felt safe. It wasn't. Inflation is a silent tax that never stops working against you. Food prices climbed more than 23% in just 4 years. Transportation costs jumped over 34% during that same stretch. Money parked in a low-interest account doesn't just sit there quietly. It shrinks. $100,000 in cash earning almost nothing loses thousands of dollars in real buying power every single year. Robert kept only a genuine emergency fund in cash, about 6 months of expenses, not a dollar more. Everything else stayed invested, working, growing faster than inflation could erode it. Safe isn't the same thing as smart. Sometimes the move that looks the safest turns out to be the slowest leak in the boat. Now let's bring in a third person because she represents a huge number of you watching this. Meet Elena. Elena is 34 and on paper she's a millionaire too, but her $1 million is almost entirely locked inside her house. Her home's value climbed, her mortgage shrank, and one day the equity crossed $1 million in total net worth. Elena felt rich. She looked rich. But here's the catch. You can't buy groceries with a kitchen. You can't pay a medical bill with a hallway. Elena is what's known as house rich and cash poor. When her car needed a $4,000 repair, she had to charge it to a credit card at 24% interest, sitting right on top of $1 million net worth. That's the paper millionaire trap. $1 million in home equity is real wealth, but it's frozen wealth. It can't compound for you the way invested dollars can, and it can't bail you out in an emergency unless you sell or borrow against your own roof. So, if your million is living inside your walls, understand precisely what it is and what it isn't. It's a milestone. It is not a plan. Here's what happens when the market inevitably drops, because it always eventually does. This is where most fresh millionaires blow themselves up. When Robert's portfolio fell 18% during a rough patch, his net worth dropped by nearly $200,000 on paper within a matter of weeks. It felt terrible, but Robert did absolutely nothing. He didn't sell. He understood that a paper loss only becomes a real loss the moment you actually hit the sell button. Priya, meanwhile, panicked. She sold near the bottom to protect what remained, then watched from the sidelines as the market clawed back every dollar and kept climbing. Selling out of fear locked in her losses for good. The market doesn't punish the people who stick around, it punishes the ones who flinch. Your behavior during a downturn matters far more than your returns during a boom. Here's what genuinely wealthy people do at this stage that most of us never witness. Robert did something that sounds boring but is genuinely powerful. He bought protection before he bought anything fun. He checked his insurance coverage first. He confirmed his term life policy would actually take care of his family if something happened to him. Then he added an umbrella liability policy which runs just a few $100s a year and shields your entire net worth from a single lawsuit or accident. Because once you're sitting on $1 million, you quietly become a target, and one bad accident can wipe out an entire decade of discipline. Priya skipped all of it because insurance feels like paying for a disaster that will never actually happen, right up until the day it does. Wealthy people protect the downside first and chase the upside second. Almost everyone else does it in exactly the wrong order. Here's a cost that quietly blindsides new millionaires, and it has nothing to do with luxury. It's healthcare. A retiring couple today may need around $172,000 after tax just to cover medical expenses in retirement, and long-term care can run $100,000 a year per person if it's ever needed. Priya looked at her million and pictured vacations. She never once pictured a nursing home bill. Robert did. He knew a real chunk of his million was already spoken for by future healthcare costs, so he never treated it as free spending money. That single mental shift is exactly why Robert's million feels smaller to him than Priya's felt to her. And exactly why Robert's million will actually last. The people who plan for the unglamorous costs are the ones who never get blindsided by them. Here's a decision that sounds smart but can quietly cost you a fortune. The moment Priya crossed $1 million, a financial advisor offered to manage everything for her, for just 1% a year. 1% sounds tiny. It isn't. 1% of $1 million is $10,000 every single year, and that fee only grows as your portfolio does. Over 30 years, that 1% can quietly eat away hundreds of thousands of dollars in returns. Now, a genuinely good advisor can absolutely be worth the cost, especially for tax strategy and planning. But you need to know exactly what you're paying and exactly what you're getting in return. Robert picked a flat fee planner he paid once a year for advice, then invested in low-cost index funds himself. Priya handed over 1% indefinitely and never actually ran the math on what forever really costs. Fees are invisible, which is exactly why they're so dangerous. Here's the one document almost every new millionaire forgets, and it can undo everything. Once you have $1 million, you need a plan for what happens to it if you're gone. Robert spent a single afternoon setting up a simple will, naming beneficiaries on every account, and putting together a basic estate plan. It wasn't expensive, and it wasn't complicated. Priya kept meaning to get to it and never did. Here's why that matters. Money without named beneficiaries can get trapped in a slow, public, expensive process called probate, where courts and lawyers get paid before your family ever sees a dime. $1 million can shrink by tens of thousands and take years to reach the people you love, all because of a form nobody ever filled out. Protecting your wealth isn't only about growing it. It's about making sure it actually lands where you want it to. Here's a mistake that feels responsible but slowly drains you. Once you hit $1 million, it's tempting to assume the saving phase is officially over. Meet Yasmin. Yasmin is 28, and she's the disciplined one. When Yasmin crossed $1 million, she made one quiet decision that changed everything. She kept contributing to her investments exactly as before. She didn't stop. She didn't coast. Every payday, the same automatic transfer went out, whether she felt like it or not. Because Yasmin understood something Priya never grasped. The habit that built the first million is the same habit that builds the fourth one. The moment you stop feeding the engine, you're asking 100% of your future growth to come from the market alone, with zero help from you. Yasmin kept her hands on both levers. Priya let go of both. 10 years from now, the gap between those two women will be measured in millions of dollars. Here's the quietest mistake of all, and honestly, the most human one. When Priya crossed $1 million, she told people, a few close friends, some family, a couple of coworkers over lunch. It felt good to say out loud, and then the requests started rolling in. Can you help cover rent this month? Can you pick up dinner tonight? You can clearly afford it. Can you lend me a bit? You're rich now. Money changes how people around you see you, and it changes how they treat you. Robert told almost nobody, not out of coldness or secrecy, but because he understood $1 million as a private tool, not a public headline. Most people simply can't stay quiet at this milestone. The ones who actually protect their wealth learn that silence at this level is its own strategy. Here's the temptation that ruins more new millionaires than any market crash ever could. Once you cross $1 million, suddenly everyone has a hot tip for you. A friend swears by some coin that tripled overnight. A coworker's startup can't possibly fail. Priya, feeling flush and a little restless, put $80,000 into a speculative bet a friend promised would double. Within 6 months, it was worth $22,000. She'd spent 30 years earning that money and 6 months gambling a chunk of it away. Robert got the same tips. He said no every single time. He understood a simple truth. You only need to get rich once. After that, the entire game shifts from growing your money to not losing it. Chasing bigger returns once you've already won isn't ambition. It's how winners hand their winnings right back. The boring index fund that got you to $1 million is still the right vehicle once you're there. Here's a habit that guards you against your own worst impulses. Robert built what he called a fun bucket. Every year he allowed himself to spend a fixed, guilt-free amount, roughly 1% of his net worth, on whatever he wanted. A trip, a gadget, a nice dinner out. No math, no guilt. Everything outside that bucket stayed completely untouchable. No exceptions. Here's the trick almost nobody talks about. Discipline doesn't mean never enjoying your money. It means deciding in advance exactly how much you're allowed to enjoy, so the other 99% keeps compounding in peace. Priya had no bucket and no boundary, so every purchase quietly borrowed from the engine. Robert drew one clear line, and that single line is what let him feel wealthy without ever actually becoming poor again. A budget at the $1 million mark isn't about scarcity. It's about protecting the machine that set you free. Here's the very first move Robert made the moment the number hit, and you can copy it exactly. Before telling anyone, before touching a single dollar, he wrote down 3 numbers on one sheet of paper. How much of his million was actually invested in growing? How much was frozen inside his house? And how much real cash he had on hand for emergencies? Most people never bother writing these three numbers down, which means they genuinely don't know if they're truly wealthy or just wealthy on paper. Robert knew. Then he set himself one rule. Any purchase over $1,000 had to wait 72 hours before he acted on it. That simple pause killed nearly every impulse buy before it could happen. Priya acted on emotion the same week she crossed her number. Robert acted on a plan, 3 days at a time. The difference between building wealth and losing it rarely comes down to intelligence. It almost always comes down to the gap between a plan written on paper and a feeling acted on in the moment. Write your three numbers down, then wait 72 hours before spending a cent of the fourth. Here's one final piece of math that ties the whole thing together. Add up everything Priya did in her first year as a millionaire. The SUV that shed $11,000 in value, the rent upgrade worth $440,000 in lost future growth, the taxes she never planned for, the cash that inflation quietly ate away, the panic sale near the market bottom. None of it felt reckless in the moment. Every single choice felt reasonable, even smart. But stacked together over 20 years, those reasonable choices ended up costing Priya more than her original $1 million. Meanwhile, Robert did almost nothing, and doing almost nothing turned out to be the single most profitable decision of his entire life. Wealth at this level isn't built through brilliant moves. It's protected through boring discipline. Run the numbers, and the boring path wins nearly every time. Now here's the part that changes everything. Everyone assumes the hard part is reaching $1 million. It isn't. The hard part is doing nothing once you actually get there. Sit with that for a second. Robert's entire edge over Priya wasn't some secret investment, a special account, or a hot stock tip. It was 90 days of doing absolutely nothing while the number quietly sat there and grew on its own. Priya's million is already shrinking, one reasonable purchase at a time. Robert's million, left completely alone and compounding at 7%, will cross $2 million before he turns 63. And he won't have saved a single additional dollar to get there. Same job, same salary, same starting number, one different decision. Here's the one line I want you to walk away with. Your first million is the last one you'll ever build with your own two hands. Every million after that, your money builds for you, but only if you're disciplined enough to leave it alone. The moment you cross $1 million isn't the moment you finally get to relax. It's the exact moment your money becomes stronger than your paycheck. And the only way to lose that gift is to spend down the engine on the very day it starts running. So the next time you picture yourself crossing that $1 million line, don't picture the celebration. Picture the 90 quiet days that come right after. Picture the old car staying right where it is in the driveway. Picture the same unremarkable grocery list you already keep. Picture the number you never mentioned to a single soul. Because that, not the party, is what actually turns 1 million into 5. If this video showed you something about your money you didn't realize was happening, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We break down the hidden math behind the financial decisions you face every day. And the next time someone tells you $1 million means you finally made it, ask them one simple question. Made it to what? Because $1 million was never a finish line. It's the very first day your money clocks in and starts working for you. Make the decision that fits your reality, not someone else's celebration.